Hey everybody, and welcome to Kingdom Connections. I'm Tyler Bowles, and once again, unfortunately, I'm by myself. Reason for that is at the time that this is being recorded, Brother Allen is still on vacation, and with the way schedules and things have been here the last couple weeks, we just haven't been able to meet up and record anything, but hopefully after this week that will no longer be the case, and I will have my other host back with me. It's a little different and honestly a little nerve-wracking when he's not here. So Alan, I miss you, brother. We're ready to have you back. Hopefully you guys had enjoyed the last episode when I was particularly talking about sonship and kind of how that plays in with having a heavenly Father. Because I think in that regard, it's something that doesn't get talked about as often as I feel like it should. But not to rehash all that. If you haven't listened to it, please go back and listen to it. But today, once again, I want to speak on a topic that it gets talked about, but I want to talk about it in a way that it doesn't normally get talked about. And as I'm sure you have seen by the title of this episode, I want to talk about the principles of stewardship. Now, when you think about stewardship, normally, in most cases, stewardship is something that is talked about in reference to tithing and with finances. And obviously, that's not wrong, but there's a whole lot more to it. And there's so many benefits of understanding the principles of stewardship because it goes well beyond wealth. It goes well beyond your finances. It goes well beyond tithing. And obviously, these are important points also, because the Bible talks about whenever you are faithful over a few things, God will make you ruler over many, and that again goes beyond more than just with your finances. But when you give your 10% or whatever God requests or whatever God asks of you, whenever you give that and you give it of a cheerful heart, and you are still able to manage and still able to use it accordingly, and I'm trying to be careful with my wording here. When you're able to do that, God in turn, you will see, and there is biblical basis that proves this point. When you were able to do that and you were able to effectively manage and steward over, I don't really know a better word to use just because it's a powerful word. When you were able to effectively steward over what God has given you, time and time again, you will see in Scripture that God will give you more. And hopefully, by me saying this, I'm hoping that you kind of see where I'm wanting to kind of steer towards. Now, obviously, like I said, when it comes to finances, stewardship, yeah, that kind of goes hand in hand. But you also have to look at it, and something that really kind of shook my foundation and kind of made me think about how I live my life is stewardship of your time. Because we have all of these passions and we have all of these things that we aspire to do and all this motivation to do things. And if you are like me, and I would assume this is normal, even though other people might say I'm crazy, I feel like it is normal to have motivation and you get after it, whatever you're getting after it, you're going 100 miles an hour. But at some point, whether it be next week, next month, next year, that motivation dies off. And it's in those moments where you go, what are you doing with the time that is given? Are you going to be a good steward of the time that you are given with whatever it is that you were trying to accomplish? Are you going to procrastinate and wait until the last minute to do whatever it is that you were wanting to do? Or are you going to thoroughly invest your time and prioritize things in a manner to where it makes logical sense, but it also makes spiritual sense? Case in point, I think it's almost everybody's New Year's resolution, or at least it should be, to grow deeper in the Word, to grow more in tune with the Lord. And the only way to do that is to spend time in His presence and spend time in His Word. I think that's very simplistic, but it's also something that's very difficult because we have an end goal and we know how to reach the results and reach what we're trying to get to. But what is the normal thing that keeps us from reaching this goal? What is the almost time and time again, the majority of the time, what is the thing that keeps you from reaching that? And it is stewardship of your time. And that is why, just my humble opinion, that is why when David was talking about seeking the Lord, he said, "Early will I seek you." Because we can get so caught up in the hustle and bustle of life because things happen. Kids go to ball games, kids go to dance recital. You might have to work over, and then a coworker doesn't show up the next day, so then you have to work over again. And then by the time you get home, you got to cook dinner, and then you got to spend time with the family. Life happens, and it happens to the best of us. And anybody that tells you that it doesn't happen, I'm just going to be honest, is lying to you. So that's why it is important to prioritize your time, because there are so many factors in the air that go into what happens throughout the day. It could be, like I said, I mean, it could be things at work. It could be things at home. You never know. Things can shift, and you end up taking more time to do something that what you would have originally intended. Especially in my line of work, if I get off at a certain time, it's a high likelihood that I don't get off at that time. And there's no way to account for that because you don't know until it gets here. You don't know until the events and the factors of the day present themselves during the course of that day. But I can tell you one thing that never changes. Well, I say never. Never is a very, very abstract word in this case because there's no such thing. But 99% of the time, I'll word it that way. 99% of the time, my mornings/afternoons, because I work in the afternoons, normally that never changes. And I will just tell you what my morning routine has consisted of. Now, whether or not it is consistent in some regards is up for debate, but I try to be as consistent as possible. My normal routine, it usually starts with me getting up, going to the gym. Then I come back to the house. I do my devotions. I turn on some worship music. That is the objective for every morning. Now, a lot of times, I'll admit, I'm not as consistent with it as I should be. Whether it be a skip out on the gym or, let's just be honest, I'm just going to be transparent. Whether I skip 5 minutes in the gym or I skip 5 minutes in my devotions, there's always something. There's always some excuse that comes up. And in the mornings, it's not even really anything that you would think like would have that big of an impact, because it's not. We make excuses, and honestly, we make excuses so that we feel better about ourselves and that we feel better about our decisions. But something that the Lord has really just drilled into me for the last, I don't know, probably 3 to 4 months is the topic of stewardship, and particularly the stewardship of your time. Like, I know that it was a few episodes back where me and Brother Allen were talking, and he asked me a question, and it resonated with me because I've been looking at the same thing, but not quite in the same way he's looked at it. He asked me, he said, what do you feel about this statement? I'm like, okay, what was the statement? And he said, if you take 10 to 15 minutes a day and practice and perfect a craft or whatever you're trying to do for 15 minutes a day, by the end of 2 to 3 years, you will be in the top 2%. And I told him in that moment that I agreed with that statement. And even today, I agree with that statement. And I branched off and talked about consistency and how consistency is an issue. But really, if you get down to the brass tacks and the consistency, the inconsistency is the fruit of a root that needs to be addressed. I'm going to say that again. The inconsistency is the fruit of a root that needs to be addressed. And that root is poor stewardship with time. Because, again, I feel like I'm reiterating, but it's an important point that I really want you to get and I really want you to understand. When it comes to stewardship of your time, if you think about it this way, now granted, people are late for work, but in a perfect world, that's a good way to put it. In a perfect world, you're on time for work. You were there. If it's an 8 to 5 job, then doggone it, you were there from 8 to 5. And if it's Monday through Friday, you better believe, unless you take time off, which we encourage you to do that, shameless plug to the Dealing with Burnout episode, you can bet your bottom dollar that if you were scheduled to work, you will be there. Short of you being sick or taking time off, you will be there. That is non-negotiable. Why? Because we got bills to pay. We got rent that's coming due. We got car payments. You got groceries to buy. You've got things for your kids that the kids need. And so this is a non-negotiable thing. Why? Because if you don't work, you don't get paid, right? So I wanted to take a different approach. And let me ask you something, those of you who are listening to this, and hopefully you haven't tuned out by now. If you treated every moment when it comes to stewardship with your time, and again, we were talking about time in the Word and that kind of thing earlier. If you take your time in the Word, your time in prayer, your time worshiping, and you schedule this thing out as if it is a non-negotiable thing, come hell or high water, I'm going to do this at this allotted time. And if you treated it as if there was a lot riding on it, because let's be honest, there is. How much more consistent and how much more of a good steward would we be? If you took time, and this is me with, if you see me, you may not think that I work out a lot, but I do work out pretty consistently. And something that I'm trying to get better at myself is I'm trying to get better at blocking out a time every day where I go, okay, from this time to this time, this is my scheduled time to work out. I'm not answering text messages. I'm not answering phone calls. I will pick up on all of that after I get back. Phone goes on do not disturb, and I just lock in on what it is I'm trying to do. And in that particular instance, it's trying to get better in the gym, trying to better my cardio, trying to improve with my weight training. I'm locked in and I'm trying to improve in this area. Again, being a good steward of my time. Now, obviously, that is not a spiritual example, but it's still an example because stewardship goes a long way. Continuing with the gym example, though, think about it this way. Again, the Bible says that when you are faithful over the few things, I'll make you ruler over many. In other words, what God is saying is when you are a good steward over what I have originally given you, I will give you more, or there is growth, right? So if I am a good steward in the gym, I put in the time, I put in the work, I block out time in my day, every day, to say, I'm not getting distracted, come hell or high water, I'm going into the gym, I'm locking in, and we're going to knock this out. And I do that consistently for a year. Think about the amount of progress that could be made if you were 100%. And I know it's a stretch of a number because we're human. If you are 100% consistent for an entire year, what kind of growth would you have? Because not only, obviously, would you have muscle growth and better endurance, but your cardiovascular health would be better. You have more experience in the gym, so therefore you can be more advanced in what you are doing with your training. odds are in this time you were probably taking time also to improve your nutrition. So you were learning new recipes and you were learning how to take better care of yourself. And you take the progress you've made in that first year, you continue to do it, go on for 5, 10 more years. The amount of growth that happens as a result, and it becomes a lifestyle change. And it all started because you were a good steward of your time to begin with. If you look at it in a spiritual setting, because obviously this is the important part, we are ambassadors of a kingdom. Yes, we were born on earth, but we were born again into a kingdom. So that's why we're in the world, but not of it. We're of the kingdom of heaven, right? So obviously, the spiritual world is the head realm, so to speak. So whatever happens in the heavenlies is going to manifest into the physical. So obviously, the spiritual side of things is vastly more important than what's in the physical, because it, like I said, it's going to birth down here in the physical also. So if you were a good steward of your time and you read your word and you dive into scripture and you spend time with God consistently for a year, how much more would you grow? How much more would God entrust you with? How much more would He speak to you? How much more would He give you as far as revelations go? Because before there is revelation, there has to be relationship. And the deeper and the more intimate the relationship, the deeper and the more just incredible the revelation is. If you were just consistent for a year, imagine the things that God would show you. And I know that's easier said than done, but that is why stewardship is so important. And we're going to go and we're going to talk about the importance of stewardship and tithing, which is how we all have probably heard it in a church setting. But before we do that, I'm going to take a quick commercial break. But I don't have all the fancy studio polish. I haven't done this for this specific thing yet because I wanted to make an announcement. I will do a fancier, quote unquote fancier, fancy to me, okay? High-tech redneck over here. I will do a fancier ad for this, but I haven't had a chance to do it yet. So for those of you who are listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anything that is not YouTube, or a web browser, I remember saying in a past episode that I was trying to brainstorm for ways for you to be able to reach out to us for questions, comments, concerns, podcast ideas, anything we can do to improve. I was trying to think of a way to be able to give you guys that outlet because, YouTube has a comment section. Facebook, whenever we share it to Facebook, it has a comment section. But Spotify, Apple Podcasts, none of that stuff, iHeartRadio podcasts, none of that stuff has comment sections. But I am excited to announce, and you may have already seen it, and maybe you just didn't know what it was. I'm excited to announce that now you can send us a text message. Let me explain real quick how to do that. If you want to get in contact with us, like I said, for whatever reason, when you click on a podcast episode of ours, and this will go, I put it on for the very first episode all the way up until now. When you click on an episode and you can look at the bio of the episode, if you look, there is a hyperlink or it's a sentence that's underlined. It says, send us a text message. When you click that button that says send us a text message, you can text us and we will be notified of whatever it is that you sent us. So I encourage you to use that because, like I said, it gives us podcast ideas. It gives us ways that we can improve, ways to keep the engagement more and more inclined and more stable, because obviously we don't want people to just tune in for 30 seconds and give out, right? So I encourage you to use that because it gives us guidelines to go by. It gives us a framework, and we can make it to where it is more of a listening pleasure for you, and so that you can get more out of it. Okay, shameless plug done for that. Now, talking on the topic of stewardship with tithing. And I can tell you from personal experience, and when I say tithing, I mean tithes and offerings. If you don't know the difference between the two, tithe is what God commands. Offering is what God places on your heart to give on top of your tithe. Don't really have time to go into all that. Maybe that can be a topic of a future episode. Let us know by sending us a text message. See that little segue there. Anyways, so I can tell you out of my personal experiences when it comes to tithes and offerings, and when it comes to being a good steward, God has always rewarded me. I can tell you, I mean, just in the last few years, I remember when my wife and I had first gotten married, we had, and we still have some debt. We haven't totally gotten it all taken care of, but we had a significant amount of debt that we needed to really knock out, because it was taking a substantial part of our income. And we weren't, and thank the Lord, He has always provided, and it's not really been a thing to where we've been stressing over our finances because of it, but it's still unnecessary baggage. And that's why, like, I hate debt, and that's a whole nother other. But I remember we sat down, and I told my wife, I said, well, I'm a firm believer in testing a spirit to see if it's God, so to speak. So I believe that when you put it to the test, that when God says that He'll pour out blessings that you won't have room to receive, it'll be pressed down, shaken together, running over. You know, you have all these prerequisites, and it's talking about building up the kingdom, and when you put that to practice and you put it to work, God will 100% of the time do His part. So I remember I told my wife, I said, let's give a little more than what we normally would. And what's funny about it is, to everybody else in the world, it seems crazy, right? Like, you're not gonna give more when you're trying to get out of debt. Like, it seems counterintuitive. But my wife, thankfully, I have a good godly wife who, when I feel like I hear from the Lord, she doesn't question it. She's like, okay, yes, sir, let's do it. And so I felt compelled in my spirit to begin giving more. We would give to different things that we were raising funds for, whether it was for the new parking lot or for the new sound system for the church, on top of our tithe. Now, this did not replace tithe. This was additional. But I felt compelled to do this because I knew that God would provide for us. And I can tell you that the debt that we wanted to take care of, due to multiple provisions from the Lord, has been paid off, and it has been paid off at an exponential rate. I remember just recently, and just a testimony to the goodness of God, and when you are a good steward over what He has given you. We had, this was, I'm trying to think, about a year ago now, actually. I want to say it was around like September. So we're almost going into July. So yeah, almost a year ago. I remember we found out that a lot of the flooring of our house had rotted out. There was a water leak that we didn't know about, and like half of the flooring in the house had to be replaced. Floor joists and subfloors, all of that had to be replaced. It ended up being a pretty substantial bill. Again, I told my wife, I said, this is an area where I believe in being a good steward over what God has given us. No, it doesn't make sense to the natural human being to give more whenever you have more bills to take care of. But I can tell you that when you do it in faith, because you know that God is going to reward you for what you give, because again, when you are faithful over the few things, He'll make you ruler over many things. He will make room for growth when you correctly and adequately steward over what He has given you to begin with. So I told my wife, I said, let's put this to the test again. And so we gave more. We gave more to offerings. And when I say gave more the first time, it was we upped our tithe. Fast forward until around December, and I get a phone call from my wife, and she told me, she said, "Hey, are you sitting down?" And my first initial reaction was like, "Oh snap, something's wrong." And she's like, "No, nothing's wrong, Don't freak out." I was like, "Okay, well, what's going on? Why'd you call other than to tell me you love me and all that fun stuff?" And she's like, "Well, I got some exciting news." I said, "What's that?" She said, "I had a friend of mine reach out to me." I was like, "Okay." And she said, "Normally these people who are also God-fearing people, by the way, normally they feel around Christmas time to give to a family in need. Now, as far as what the amount is, I don't know. To my knowledge, I think it depends year to year." She said, we have this old car that it runs, we just don't use it. So we want to sell it. It's paid for. We want to sell it and bless you guys with whatever we make off of it. And if I remember correctly, and I'm only giving you the numbers because I just want to be fully transparent and brag on God. Because when I talk about stewardship, it's not something that I haven't tried to live out myself, and it's something that I have seen God move in my own life. And I want to encourage you because He will do the same for you. I want to say that by the time they sold that car, they ended up giving us like a $3,000 check for that. And we then, this was just a few months ago, and I don't remember what the amount was, but we ended up getting a letter from our mortgage company saying that somehow there was a calculation messed up or something along those lines. And we ended up getting a check in the mail because we ended up, what they did was they overcharged us on the account for some other financial stuff that I don't know the lingo. My wife could tell you better. The only thing I know how to do with money is spend it. And all the fellow men said amen, because, Bass Pro Shops is like next to heaven for us. Anyways, so that was unexpected income that we didn't see coming. And yeah, you can chalk it up to, well, the mortgage company messed up. And, sure, absolutely, you could. But I choose to believe that because we were good stewards of what God gave to us first, God's saying, all right, now that you were a good steward with this, let me give it back to you, because you're in need of this and you were good stewards here. So now I'm going to give you more than what you had originally. And I'm telling you, when you allow God to work in your life in the area of stewardship, you will not be disappointed, because God will meet you every single time. Every time you say, God, you have given me this, whether it be a talent, it could be a calling, because talents and callings are different. Whether it be a talent, whether it be a calling, whether it be your finances, whether it be your time. When you say, God, I give you this because you gave it to me first, but I want to deal it and wield it responsibly. God will honor that, and He will supersede whatever expectations you had, just because that is how good He is. And so, in closing remarks, I just want to encourage you today. I encourage you to journal if you don't journal. I mean, I keep notes in my phone. I'm a terrible journaler. I can barely read and speak English, so journaling for me is not the best avenue. But for a lot of people, it is. I like I said, I like to keep notes on my phone. Keep track of it. How has God moved for you? Has He done things for you ever since you've said, God, I give this over to you? And I guarantee you, when you look back, He absolutely has. Because that's just the kind of God He is. And that should encourage you and propel you forward. Because now this isn't just a God that you read about in a Bible, but this is a tangible thing to where when you go, God, I'm going to be a good steward over what you gave me, you see the Lord move in your life, and it makes it that much more real. And it makes, at least for me, it made something click to where now I am excited to steward over what God has given me. Because I know that the rate of return is something that's unimaginable. Why? Because God supersedes expectations. He supersedes imaginations. So it gets me excited when I have an opportunity to steward over something. Just like it should excite you. Yes, it is scary at first. It is a huge step of faith. But when things finally begin to click and things begin to turn around because you were a good steward over what God has given you, and you begin to see, wow, this thing actually works. You too, trust me, and I can promise you that there will be other testimonies other than mine. You can ask around, and I promise you, people will tell you the same thing. What God does whenever you are a good steward, words just can't describe it. But, like I said, you can always start, if nothing else, you can start with your time. How is your time being spent? And you will find that when you're a good steward of your time, it will naturally improve things on your job because your work ethic will get better. So not just speaking in spiritual terms. I mean, obviously, yes, that's important. Obviously, it's important to spend time in the Word. It's important to spend time with the Lord in prayer and in worship. Obviously, all that's important. But stewardship of your time also goes far beyond that. Because when you're on the job, you are entrusted by whatever company you were employed by to be a good steward of your time. And when you do everything as if it is for the glory of the Lord, because again, like I had mentioned last week, that is something that Paul says, do everything you do for the glory of the Lord. So when you are a good steward of your time on the job, just like you are a good steward of your time with the Lord, your work ethic increases, which means more than likely there will be advancement in your career because your supervisors will begin to take notice of this, because who doesn't like a hard worker, right? Things at home will improve because you were a good manager of your time, so you were able to spend time with your family. It's just, it's a win-win. So I encourage you, start with your time. If you're listening to this and you are a horrible time manager, ask the Lord to help you, but then sit down and go, okay, I'm going to work on this one area. I've got all of this I need to work on, and it's something that we continue to do on a daily basis. Nobody's perfect. But when you take this one area and say, God, I'm going to give you this. I'm going to perfect this. I'm going to keep after this until it gets to a place to where I feel like I can move on. I'm going to give you this. If nothing else, I'll give you the mornings to spend with you. And then once it becomes a thing to where it just becomes habit, and you're spending time with the Lord, and like when you miss it, you actually like you miss it. You know, you miss the time, but then you also miss being in His presence. Like you long for Him because it's something that's now a part of you. When it gets to that point, it almost feels like a punishment when you miss it. And when it gets to that point, then move on to something else. You're obviously you get to a point where you're a good steward of your time there, so then you can move on to another area and improve that area. And you're never going to be perfect, but it's a whole lot better than just sitting there and not doing anything and having no guide and no foundation for what you do with your time. So, that being said, I hope this helped you. I hope you learned something from it. I hope it motivated you to go, God, you have given me time on this earth. Help me to do with it what you want me to. I hope it encouraged you and I hope it blessed you. I love you guys. We'll see you next week. God bless. Hey guys, real quick before I let you go, this is Worship Pastor Tyler Bowles, and I'm also one of the podcast hosts here. I just want to take a minute to invite you to our services if you're in the Lexington, North Carolina area and you don't already have a home church. We have services on Sunday morning at 11 a.m. and Wednesday night at 7 p.m. We have programs in place for all ages, so please bring your family, tell your neighbors, tell your friends, have them bring their kids. We would love to get to meet you and connect with all of you and partner with you and believe with you for the things that you are believing God for. Because something very powerful happens whenever we gather together in one mind with one accord, because the Bible says then a suddenly happens. And I just want to agree with you and bind together with you for the suddenly moments, for those breakthroughs you may need. So if you were in the Lexington, North Carolina area and you don't already have a home church, the address is 117 Harris Road, Lexington, North Carolina, 27292. Again, that is 117 Harris Road, Lexington, North Carolina, 27292. We would love to see you. We would love to see your family. We would love to get to know you. We love you. We appreciate you. We are praying for you. God bless.